Good morning, class. Welcome back. I want to take a few minutes here this morning. It's not been long since we adjourned our class for today. I want to take a little time to try to keep us up to speed. You'll notice that from time to time I'll use screencasts as a way of addressing material that we didn't quite get to in class. And as your instructor, I justify that in the sense that I would much rather put up a screencast or include extra comments after class in this way than interrupt or disrupt an otherwise quality conversation that we're having in class. And you folks had some wonderful things to share today in class, and I enjoyed our exchange, and I'm happy to post a little extra as a way of making sure that we got through an important conversation in class today. So as you all know, we read for today a special essay by a collection of writers, Clay, Senecal, and I forget the third person's name offhand. It'll appear here momentarily. It was talking about what happens to women when the first urban centers or the first cities emerge onto the radar of ancient world civilization. And this is a really important topic, and as I mentioned in class today, I think a really important part of our thinking through a historical lens is to realize that almost everything that we experience, and it's true today and it was true back thousands of years ago, almost everything is a historically constructed reality. And I think this is the real benefit of studying history, is that if we can think about how the reality, the experiences, the routines, the institutions, the buildings, the stores, the trade patterns, if we start to think about them in their historical context, where they came from, it also helps us think about how we might make our world a better place, right? If our current reality was built historically, then how is our future reality going to be built? And perhaps we can even use that insight to try to make the world and our lives better things. Okay, so first off, we're talking about Clay, Paul, and Senecal. Okay, so we're talking about women. The big term for today is patriarchy. Patriarchy meaning male domination. So a patriarchal society is one where men, by and large, control the power and drive the character, the formation of that society. And so Clay, Paul, and Senecal are all trying to explain how historically the situation for women changes with the emergence of these first cities some 5,000 years ago. And so the purposes these earliest states existed to serve, I think some of you mentioned it briefly in our conversation in class today, but in a word, it was about security. And a term closely related to security is stability. Now, some of you might know security and stability, if you think about those in their modern sense, they're pretty important things, right? To know that when we wake up in the morning, there's a reasonable sense that we're going to make it through our day without being attacked, without being physically harmed, to know that there's a general flow to our day, that we can expect that when we get to campus for our 8:30 class, that other people are going to be there, that the instructor is going to be there, that the instructor is going to be prepared, that the experience I have in that class is going to be worthwhile. These are aspects of stability and also security. Now, you might also notice that sometimes the price we pay for security and stability, sometimes security and stability happen at the expense of things like justice or fairness. For example, is it fair that there are civilians in far-off places that are suffering the damages of airstrikes or bombs falling from planes or drone strikes because the United States is trying to defend its national interests in security and taking out people who might pose a threat to America's national interests? Okay? This is a case where security and stability sometimes take place at the expense of justice or fairness. So just to use that example, in the early establishment of cities, the all-important objective of security and stability, I should say objectives of security and stability, sometimes occurred at the expense of justice and fairness. And if you think particularly about the experience of women in these early cities, that probably becomes pretty true. So what are some specific examples of security and stability? Well, there are developments like irrigation. If you think about irrigation, being able to harness the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, or in the case of Egypt, the Nile River, being able to predictably take, when there's too much water, being able to direct it in a meaningful way that doesn't destroy crops. Likewise, being able to use it then at a different time later in the year when perhaps the soil needs to have that water. This is an element of stability, right? Irrigation is an effort to engineer a solution to the problem of too much and too little and try to render it a perfect amount by the way in which we make water available for agriculture. And that stability is important. Now, if you are a leader, if you are someone who is familiar with the technology, or if you are a king who has presided over the construction of an irrigation project, you're probably going to get some real benefit out of that. The people are dependent upon you. The people are grateful to you for your ability to provide for them, and therefore you have greater power over them. And if we think about this security and stability in the case of irrigation, similar example would be in technology. Now that we have plows, these bronze plows, they allow for agriculture to happen more efficiently, so it can take place on a greater scale. It can feed more people, which creates a greater surplus. A greater surplus allows for more people to specialize. More people specializing creates greater diversity and variety for that particular city, and it allows it to flourish. So you can see how these things are very closely related. Another way that stability is created is through law. When these cities form, now suddenly we have a need for law, because in the hunter-gatherer mode of existence, law was as simple as what family and clans established as norms between them. But now we have more strangers gathering in the cities, people who don't necessarily have a familiarity with one another, people who don't necessarily think the same way because their histories and their tribes and their clans thought about things perhaps differently. So now you have laws, you have written, in some cases written laws, and those laws will maintain the stability. So you're starting to see less emphasis upon relationships and more emphasis upon institutions. Okay, so security is a critical thing that these early states existed to serve. And sometimes, now that we have irrigation, the roles that different social groups play, particularly men and women, are going to change. And also the rules that govern society are going to change. Okay, so how did the steady urbanization of pre-civilized societies contribute to changes in agriculture? What did this mean for women? Okay, so we're now starting to produce food on a greater scale with greater surpluses. One way of thinking about this change, the change that happens during the Mesolithic period, which is that period of time from when the agricultural revolution first takes place, roughly 10,000 years ago, and then the formation of major cities, roughly 5,000 years ago. Over that 5,000 year period that we can refer to as the Mesolithic age, it's almost as though men are the ones that are getting displaced, and because they're being displaced, they take over what women had been doing. So bear with me on this. So if you think about it, in a Paleolithic mode of existence, men did a lot of the hunting, some of the gathering too. But women did some of the basic agriculture closer to the hearth of home, meaning they would probably use, we would actually call it horticulture, small-scale agriculture that was largely done to feed the family. It was done with simple tools like wooden hoes and so on and so forth. Agriculture will come along later. That will use technology, and it will be a much larger scale productive enterprise. But during the Mesolithic period, that transitional phase, what's happening is the men are no longer going to be the hunters that they once were, because society has started to settle down into one place. It's become sedentary. So no longer are the tribes and the clans moving in pursuit of game and moving in pursuit of berries, moving in pursuit of roots, so on and so forth. Now they're settling down. And now that they're settling down, the men's traditional role of hunting becomes much less critical. And so the men think, what do we do now? And essentially what starts to happen is they begin to displace the females from their traditional role of small-scale horticulture. The men are going to turn that into agriculture, but what it creates for the women, now that they're in an urban setting in closer proximity to others, it creates a dramatic change. In this anonymous environment of the city, women become a much more protected social group. And when I mean protected, what I mean is men protect them by depriving them of a larger role within society. So I should put the protect in air quotes. Women are going to become symbolic of a man's ability to secure his property, to provide for his family, so on and so forth. And so for women, women are going to be moved inward, sort of into the household. Men feel a strong desire to protect their women. That could be their wives, that could be their daughters, it could be their female slaves or concubines, to protect them from other men. Okay? This is not altogether different from some of the experiences that women today feel in different parts of the Middle East, where they are living, we call it the hijab, behind the veil. Okay? And it becomes really important for men to protect this. Men are also going to provide much of the agricultural role that had previously been thought of as the realm of women. Okay? And then the family factors into this experience of young women, because now increasingly the father will be in charge. It will be a paternal, a patriarchal arrangement. We still have little glimpses of this in our even contemporary or modern world, right? You might think of the challenge that any young male might feel when he goes to meet the father of his girlfriend for the first time. There's that sort of paternal power. Is the father going to agree and give his blessing that his daughter date or spend time with this particular guy? Or is he going to withhold that blessing? Similarly, will he extend his daughter to this man in marriage, if that's what it comes to? So the family factors into this experience of young women, because women are going to become essentially symbols or objects of this new urban city environment. And the protection of them and the shelter of them is going to become all important for men, but certainly unfortunate by our modern sensibilities. This means that women are going to suffer from not being really agents or individuals of society who are in control of their own fate. And so the patriarchy and the historical character of it is being addressed fairly well in this piece. And the question I'd like to leave you with before I stop here in just a few moments is, do you sense this? In what ways is this article does it still speak to the realities of early 21st century, even American society? And then, of course, in what ways has American society left this sort of thinking, this sort of role for women in the past? And I'll leave you with that to chew on. All right, we'll see you tomorrow.